Hey, welcome to History Chats. Another little mini history chat here. Um, Not quite a full return, but I came across an interesting story, and I wanted to just put something together to try to explain it. Um, if you're on Facebook following our page in the past week, for the 4th of July, you might have seen a post in which I talked a little bit about a curious occurrence back in almost 100 years ago in 1926, in which seemingly Wausau, the city of Wausau, just doesn't celebrate the 4th of July officially. Um, it's kind of strange. And in digging into that, I think it gives an interesting idea. And I just wanted to kind of to be clear, we don't actually know the specific answer. I'm sure that there's more to the story than we can find. But looking at the sources that I have access to, it seems as though there was maybe some things that we can learn about why this might have happened or not happened, and also what it means to even celebrate the 4th of July in this period. So I wanted to dig into it a little bit more with this. So, okay, why isn't there? This is an article from the day before the 4th of July in 1926 from the Wausau Daily Herald, saying that Wausau does not pull off a big 4th of July celebration Monday, but its heart is with the celebrators just the same, and its presence will be made known in other localities where celebrations are held. And there are quite a few of them, in fact. Another article here from also this edition of the newspaper talks about all of the other celebrations, of which there were many. Including notably some places across Marathon County. Athens has a celebration. A lot of places do. Athens, Marathon, Halder, Edgar seems to be the big one, where they have a big parade, some races, a band concert, and dancing into the evening. There's also quite a bit of stuff happening up at Cherokee, which is not a community that we're maybe as familiar with, as it's not really a existing community, but sort of on the where Cherokee Park ends up being, but not in Wausau. And partially, I don't want to necessarily use this as an excuse to talk about Wausau yet again, but I think there's some curiousness of, well, why is Edgar the home of the celebration for the 4th of July? And especially in 1926, which marked the 150 years since the Declaration of Independence and the start of the American Revolution on July 4th, 1776. 150 years feels like it's a good opportunity to celebrate, and yet nothing happens really in Wausau. And it's not like we didn't celebrate it the 4th of July, right? This is from the year earlier in 1925, in which apparently thousands came. When they say thousands, 2,000 people estimated, maybe it's the high level there, but about 2,000 people showed up over the course of that day for a little parade and a holiday concert, a patriotic concert by the 128th Infantry Band, which was our community band at the time. Some speeches, as is traditional, regarding the parade. It's an interesting thing here. So they have a parade that was headed by a guy named Neil Smith, who was now at this point living in Wausau, but was formerly a Montana cowboy. So he's dressed up in, you know, cowboy costume, Western cowboy costume. And he was at the head of the parade, followed by the American flag, Mayor Flatter, city aldermen, the 128th Infantry Band, civilians on foot, and many automobiles. So, kind of a fun thing. But a year later, nothing? Well, not nothing. So realistically speaking, people were celebrating, just not as like a formal event. There was another band concert held kind of on the edge of town. So this would have been at the healthcare center, or at that time the asylum grounds. And there was apparently a big golf tournament, as you might expect. But a lot of the folks in Wausau were celebrating, it was a family neighborhood celebrations as opposed to like a citywide experience. And in fact, apparently many of the people ended up going out to Edgar, to Cherokee, to Athens and Marathon and Halder and other counties to spend time as well. And trying to understand why it's really interesting because we don't really get an answer, but we kind of do. Well, I mean, let's look into this, right? About a week or two before the 4th, the Wausau Daily Herald does add this, which kind of speaks, kind of points in some interesting directions. So the little article says, there does not seem to be the interest taken in the 4th of July celebrations this year that there has been in the past. We do not believe that people are less patriotic now than they were 30 years ago when a 4th of July celebration was the big event of the year. And then they point out some interesting things. The advent of the automobile, which makes it possible for families to get to the woods on the day, and especially this year when the 4th comes on a Saturday, probably has much to do with this lack of interest. Again, Edgar's having a fun, activities. Let's go to Edgar. And there's some draw on getting in an automobile and leaving town and, celebrating in a different way. Then they also point out that, the putting in the calendar of additional holidays, like Labor Day and Armistice Day, has to some extent taken away the glamour of the nation's birthday, which is, I don't know, I feel like it's a bit of a reach, but it's not as big of a reach as it might seem. Like, it's not that everybody's excited for Labor Day or Armistice Day, and so we're not celebrating the 4th. I don't think that's what they're necessarily getting at here. It's not there's too many federal holidays these days. It's not really an argument there, but instead an argument of, if we're going to celebrate it properly, somebody's got to do it, right? And if the number of people who are organizing citywide events, to do one for a Labor Day parade and do Armistice Day and Flag Day and Memorial Day and the 4th, it's a lot of stuff that, in those warmer months. And keep in mind that, like, most people these days probably are very familiar with the JC's celebration. The Junior Chamber of Commerce in 1945-46 in Wausau takes on the task of organizing the 4th of July celebrations, which they did for years and years and years. In fact, the committee kind of outlasted the whole JC's, although, not so much these days. But I think that it illustrates the immense amount of work that in planning that goes into a celebration. It's not just showing up and somebody lights off a bunch of fireworks. There's a lot of planning. There's food vendors. There's, if you're going to have a parade, you got to organize all of that. Like, celebrations are hard to plan, and you need somebody who's going to step up and make that happen. And in the 1920s, there wasn't the JCs. They hadn't taken on this. And the patriotic groups, the service groups like the American Legion and the VFW, the Grand Army of the Republic for the Civil War, like, these guys had kind of their plates full with the more patriotic sort of service-based things, Memorial Day and Veterans Day, or Armistice Day at the time, Flag Day. Like, there's a lot of stuff to cover. And I think that the argument here is essentially, it's a lot, and nobody stepped up, and so we just don't have a celebration. And I think that unfortunately, I don't think there's anything that scandalous about this. I think it literally is just we dropped the ball, right? But it's interesting, right? Because it's not just a matter of, hey, we just didn't celebrate the 4th. Shoot. There's a lot that goes into the 1920s, right? Compared to what they had in the earlier days, where you can just get a bunch of people together and have a parade and have somebody give some words. Now you need fireworks, and you need, races and dances and all of these other food vendors. It gets a lot. But still, why not do it for is it the 150th, right? 150. It's a big number. It's a nice round number. And the country, and even here, we were celebrating that. We were acknowledging this. This is an article from earlier in the year, in March, talking about how Uncle Sam will soon be celebrating his 150th birthday anniversary. What are we going to do about it? How do we recognize it? They quote a little bit from the Sheboygan Press, which makes the editorial take that somebody's got to step up and do it, right? And I think if we look at the bottom here, after kind of quoting this, they say, we might think this over. It might be good to think about it. One of the chief failings of the modern American is his disposition to let the other fellow do it. When it comes to the hard work at 4th of July celebrations, or getting out the vote on Election Day, or other public service duties, It isn't the sort of idea which placed the United States on the map 150 years ago. So even in March, they're kind of like, well, we got to do something. And I think ultimately the ball got dropped, unfortunately. And you know what happens. I think we're at an interesting transitionary period where the community is growing and we expect a lot more, right? We expect fireworks and a parade and all that stuff. But we hadn't quite figured out the sort of social framework to have, okay, the JCs are going to take this over, right? But I think there's also something interesting here too, because I think the importance of 150 speaks to this idea that like, what does that mean, right? And I think that the 4th of July is the Declaration of Independence. It's July 4th, 1776 in Philadelphia. They Here's this document. We started on the path. Beautiful words written by Thomas Jefferson, largely by Jefferson, that kind of set out the plan. Here's the ideals that we are going to embody as a country and how we hope to move forward. And that is a moment that is harder to understand. Like, people here can do what we always do, which is to take, the importance, read through the Declaration of Independence and learn about the history and reflect on how, are we living up to the ideals set forth in this document? How can we be doing more in the future? But like, we can't take people down the main street of Wausau or Edgar or Cherokee and say, here's where the Declaration was signed, right? Because it didn't happen here. Marathon County didn't exist in 1776. It didn't exist for the 50th anniversary in 1826. It did by the 100th, but the reason here is I think that many of these people said, the 4th, we're not going to do anything terribly special because like that. How do we do that? It didn't happen here, right? Even if we look at like, this is the discussion about what happened at Cherokee, which is an interesting read. Again, Cherokee, little crossroads, not a huge community, but has aspirations, and they just got this new county park. I just love, the morning started with a ball game between the Cherokee Club team, and the second team from Stratford. Although they note that it would hardly be fair to put the game in records of the club's team, because when the members of the team gazed upon the full-grown men of Stratford, they called in outside help. They weren't quite up for the task, but they did their best. And ultimately, even with the help, they ended up defeating the Stratford boys 8-7. And then after the game, the boys hurried over to the park and started cooking hamburgers for the hungry folks. And they had some speeches, some patriotic speeches. There is some fireworks, although they note that like, we didn't go overboard because people get sick of fireworks if they go on too long. So we did it economically. At no point does this really make a point, and maybe in the speeches they got into it, but like, this doesn't seem to celebrate the 150th. It's just to get together in a patriotic celebration of the 4th of July. And I think that shift is kind of interesting. At the time, the way that they thought that this was important is, hey, we're going to have a big party in Philadelphia. That's what they did for the 100th back in 1876. That's what they did here in the 150th in 1925. But it's starting to kind of wear thin. And I think what's going to very clearly transition by the time we get to the bicentennial in 1976 is that there's a different philosophy in how we can relate to this story. Previously, it was sort of like, well, if we weren't there for the moment, like we can look back at what's happening over in Philadelphia, but whatever. The shift that's going to end up happening is to say that like, no, we can celebrate our history too. We're part of this nation. Even if we weren't there at the beginning, we've been here long enough to have a history to talk about, which is really, I don't know. The more that I look into this, the more remarkable it is that the bicentennial did this, right? They don't just have a big party in Philadelphia. It'd been fun to be there in Philadelphia in 1976, but they had celebrations all over the county, and that county history was really on display. And it's one of those really catalyzing moments. These moments in which many people recognize that, hey, we have history here. Let's write that stuff down. Let's put out a book. Let's do some oral interviews. Let's talk about it. And that is a different sort of way that people thought about it back in the 1920s, which I think is just interesting, right? Even if it ultimately comes down to the question of like, who's going to do it, and that's why it falls apart in Wausau. to have a big old celebration, it does lead to some interesting, wider stories here, including maybe taking this lesson to heart, because if you're doing the math here, or maybe you're familiar with this, next year in 2026 we will be celebrating 250 years since the American Revolutionary War started with the Declaration of Independence, and hey, it's up to us to decide, what are we going to do in this generation to celebrate? How are we going to, remark upon it? What are we going to take from it? Are we going to drop the ball because nobody wants to stand up and say, hey, I'll help out with that? Please don't get involved. I don't know. We'll see what that ends up being. But, as we get into this year leading up to the 250th, there's a grassroots effort here. We can tell our own stories, and we're going to. And, hopefully we find people that are willing to help out in various ways, and we'll have a good time celebrating the 250th next year. Anyway, that was sort of it. Yeah, I don't know. In the next few weeks, I'm actually going to kind of highlight on our social media and maybe a video or two, we'll see, about the bicentennial, about some of the interesting things that got created for that, and maybe take a look back on them and say, how did this hold up, and maybe find some inspiration for what we can do in the future. But for now, thank you for watching. Kind of a shorter one here, at least I hope so. It's getting up there. Just a little story that I wanted to share, and hope you enjoyed. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time for some more History Chats.